I stood in the grand lobby of the Monarch Club watching my father's face turn crimson as the headlines flashed across every major news outlet. Prominent businessman, Harold Vance, under federal investigation for investment fraud. But that wasn't even the most satisfying part. The real victory had happened exactly 1 year ago on a Christmas Eve that changed everything. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Your support means everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. I had always been the invisible daughter, the one who didn't quite fit the Vance family mold. While my brother Nathan strutted around in his tailored suits arm in arm with his trophy wife, Tiffany, I was the one they whispered about at family gatherings. The daughter who chose a practical career over social climbing, the one who drove a sensible car instead of showing off. The disappointment. My childhood was a masterclass in feeling inadequate. I remember being 10 years old sitting at the dinner table after winning the regional science fair. I had been so excited to tell my parents about my project on renewable energy systems. I had spent 3 months building a working model of a solar-powered water purification system. The judges had called it remarkable for someone my age. My father had looked up from his steak for approximately 5 seconds before saying, "That's nice, Eleanor. Nathan, tell us about the touchdown you scored today." And just like that, my moment was over. Nathan's football game, which their team had lost, became the center of conversation for the rest of the evening. I learned then that in the Vance household, traditional masculine achievements would always overshadow intellectual accomplishments, especially those of a daughter. My mother, Patricia, was no better. She had been a beauty queen in her youth, second runner-up in Miss Virginia, and she had never quite recovered from not winning. She poured all her frustrated ambitions into appearances, into maintaining the perfect facade of success and elegance. When I was 13 and going through an awkward phase, she once looked at me with genuine disappointment and said, "Eleanor, honey, you really need to do something about yourself. How will you ever find a good husband looking like that?" I had tried to tell her I didn't care about finding a husband, that I wanted to go to MIT and study computer science. She had laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Darling, girls don't do well in those fields. Why don't you think about something more suitable? Maybe communications or elementary education." But I was stubborn. I worked 3 jobs through high school, saved every penny, and applied to MIT without telling them. When I got in with a partial scholarship, I presented it to them at dinner like it was a gift. My father had frowned, calculated the remaining tuition in his head, and said, "That's a lot of money for a degree you probably won't use once you get married." I went anyway. I took out student loans, worked as a research assistant, coded websites for small businesses at night, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in business. My parents didn't come to my graduation. Nathan had a golf tournament that weekend, and according to my mother, they couldn't possibly miss it. After graduation, I moved to Seattle and got a job at a mid-sized tech company. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, ate ramen more nights than I care to remember, and spent every free moment working on my own project. I had identified a critical gap in data security for financial institutions, a vulnerability that most companies didn't even know existed. I built a software solution that was elegant, efficient, and revolutionary. When I was 24, I left my job and founded Secure Vance Systems. The name was both a tribute to my family and a quiet rebellion, a way of saying I could succeed with the Vance name on my own terms. I hired 2 brilliant developers who believed in my vision, and we worked 18-hour days in a cramped office that smelled perpetually of coffee and desperation. 2 years later, we had contracts with 15 major banks. 1 year after that, the big fish came calling. A tech giant wanted to acquire us, and they were willing to pay $60 million. $60 million. For a company I had started with $20,000 of student loan debt and a dream. I called my parents to tell them. I was 26 years old and I had just become wealthier than my father had been at 50. Surely this would make them proud. Surely this would finally prove that I was worth their attention, their respect, their love. My mother answered the phone. "Oh, Eleanor, this is a bad time. We're getting ready for Nathan and Tiffany's engagement party. Can you call back next week?" "Mom, I just sold my company for $60 million. There was a pause. A long pause. "Then that's wonderful, dear. Listen, about the engagement party, we weren't sure if you'd want to come. It's going to be quite fancy, and we know you're not really comfortable in those situations." I should have known then. I should have recognized that moment for what it was. They hadn't asked about the company, about what I had built, about how I had done it. They had simply found a way to make it about Nathan again and in the same breath uninvited me from a family event. But I went to that engagement party anyway. I bought a simple but elegant dress, had my hair professionally done for the first time in years, and showed up with a generous check as an engagement gift. The party was at the Monarch Club, a place I had never been before but had heard about constantly. It was where the Vance family held all their important events, where they networked with other wealthy families, where they performed their elaborate dance of social status. I remember walking into the club that first time and being struck by its beauty. The grand lobby with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, the rich mahogany paneling and plush carpets, the way everything gleamed with wealth and tradition. For just a moment, I felt out of place in a way that had nothing to do with my family and everything to do with the sheer opulence of the space. Tiffany found me within minutes of my arrival. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car, her blonde hair perfectly, styled her makeup flawless. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Eleanor, you came. How sweet." Her voice dripped with false warmth. "I love your dress. Is it vintage?" It was brand new and had cost me $800 more than I had ever spent on a single piece of clothing. But I knew what she was really asking. She was asking if it was cheap, if it was out of style, if it marked me as someone who didn't belong. "It's new, actually," I said, keeping my voice even. "Congratulations on your engagement. Nathan's a lucky man." She laughed, that tinkling artificial laugh that I would come to know so well. "Oh, I'm the lucky one. Your brother is going to give me such a wonderful life. His father's connections, the family name membership here at the Monarch. It's everything I've ever wanted. Not love, I noticed. Not partnership or companionship or shared dreams. Just status, connections, and access." The engagement party was the first of many events where I felt like a ghost in my own family. I watched Nathan and Tiffany hold court, accepting congratulations and showing off Tiffany's enormous engagement ring. I watched my parents beam with pride, introducing Tiffany to everyone as our future daughter from the Huntington family, you know. When people asked about me, my mother would say vaguely, "Oh, that's Eleanor, our daughter. She does something with computers in Seattle," as if my accomplishment, my company, my success was just something with computers. I left that party early, driving away from the Monarch Club with tears streaming down my face. But those tears weren't just sadness. They were rage. Pure crystalline rage at being diminished, at being made invisible, at having my achievements reduced to a footnote in Nathan's story. That night, lying in my hotel room, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them anymore. I wouldn't share my successes or my life with people who refused to value them. I would build my own world separate from theirs, and I would let them continue believing whatever they wanted to believe about me. Over the next 6 years, I built an empire they knew nothing about. I invested the money from the sale of secure Vance systems carefully and strategically. I diversified into real estate, tech startups, and sustainable energy. I funded a venture capital firm that focused on supporting women and minority entrepreneurs in tech. My net worth grew from $60 million to over $200 million, and I stayed quiet about all of it. I moved back to the area, bought a beautiful but understated townhouse, and drove my Tesla Model 3. When my family asked what I was doing, I said I was consulting and doing some investment work. They nodded dismissively and changed the subject exactly as I knew they would. 5 years ago, I started the Vance Foundation. I poured $10 million of my own money into it as seed funding and focused on 3 areas: education for underprivileged children, support for veterans and their families, and financial literacy, and assistance for people recovering from investment fraud. That last category was personal. I had seen too many stories of ordinary people being scammed by wealthy investors who faced no consequences. My father, Harold Vance, liked to present himself as a pillar of the business community and a champion of veterans. He had served in the military for 4 years, and he never let anyone forget it. He wore his veteran status like a badge of honor, bringing it up constantly, using it to add credibility to his business ventures and social climbing. But I knew the truth. He never volunteered at veteran organizations. He never donated to veteran causes unless there was a photo opportunity attached. His service to veterans began and ended with telling war stories at cocktail parties. So I made sure the Vance Foundation actually did the work he only pretended to care about. 6 years ago, I learned that the Monarch Club was quietly for sale. The previous owners, an old family whose last heir wanted to retire, were looking for a buyer who would maintain the club's traditions and standards. They weren't advertising the sale publicly because they didn't want it to become a bidding war that would attract the wrong kind of buyer, someone who would turn it into a generic luxury resort or golf course development. I reached out through a lawyer, made an offer, and purchased the club for $18 million through a newly created holding company called Vance Holdings. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. I was literally holding the place where my family performed their status rituals, and they had no idea. I hired Richard Sterling as general manager. Richard was a hospitality professional with 20 years of experience and a reputation for running tight ships. More importantly, he was someone who valued integrity and respect over prestige. During his interview, I told him plainly that I was the owner, but wanted to remain anonymous, and that I expected the club to be a place where everyone from the dishwasher to the most elite member was treated with dignity. I've seen too many places where the staff are treated like servants rather than professionals, I told him. I want this club to be different. Richard had smiled and said, "Miss Vance, I've been waiting my entire career for an owner who thinks that way." Over the years, I watched my family at the club through Richard's reports and occasional personal observations. I would sometimes visit quietly, sitting in less prominent areas observing. I saw how they treated the wait staff with barely concealed contempt. I saw Tiffany snap her fingers at servers and complain loudly about minor imperfections in her meals. I saw my mother speak to the valet attendants like they were trained dogs rather than people. I saw my father demand special treatment and throw around his platinum membership status like it granted him lordship over everyone else. But I also saw something else. I saw that their platinum membership with its 25% discount wasn't just a status symbol. They needed it. My father's business ventures hadn't been going well for years. He was heavily leveraged, making risky investments to try to maintain the lifestyle he had built. The discount on their club meals, their golf, their events was actually a financial necessity disguised as a privilege. And I saw their obsession with the Heritage Club. The Heritage Club was an elite tier within the Monarch, limited to just 25 families. Members had access to exclusive facilities, private dining rooms, priority reservations, and most importantly, an unparalleled network of wealth and influence. It was the absolute pinnacle of social status in our area. My father talked about Heritage Club membership the way some people talk about winning the lottery. He had applied 3 times and been rejected 3 times, though he never told anyone outside the immediate family about those rejections. The requirements were stringent: a nomination from 2 current Heritage Club members, unanimous approval from the Board of Trustees, financial vetting to ensure the family could afford the substantially higher dues, and final approval from the club owner. My father had finally secured nominations from 2 members he had been cultivating relationships with for years. He had submitted his application 6 months before that Christmas Eve, and it was under review. This time he was certain he would get in. This time he had convinced himself the Vance family would finally reach the social stratosphere they deserved. I had been reviewing his application in my role as owner. I saw the financial statements that showed his precarious position. I saw the letters of recommendation that praised his business acumen but conspicuously avoided mentioning his character. I saw the whole desperate package of a man trying to use status to paper over his failures. But I hadn't made a decision yet. Part of me, the part that still remembered being that 10-year-old girl excited about her science project, wanted to approve it, wanted to give him what he wanted so badly, wanted to finally do something that would make him happy and proud. The other part of me knew that giving my father access to the Heritage Club would be like giving an alcoholic the keys to a liquor store. He would use those connections to perpetuate whatever schemes he was running, to hurt more people, to dig himself deeper into whatever hole he was creating. For months, I agonized over this decision. I consulted with Richard, with Judge Beaumont, who chaired our board of trustees, with the Robertsons, who were Heritage Club members, and served on my foundation board. Everyone was diplomatic, but the message was clear: Harold Vance shouldn't be given access to that level of influence and trust. Then came the invitation to Christmas Eve dinner. It was from my mother, sent via text message. Family dinner at the Monarch Club, Christmas Eve, 7 p.m. Try to look presentable. Not "we'd love to see you" or "we miss you." Just try to look presentable. I should have declined. I should have spent that Christmas Eve with friends or volunteering or literally anything else. But there was still that small part of me that hoped, that believed maybe this year would be different. Maybe they had invited me because they actually wanted to spend the holiday with me. I spent Christmas Eve day working at a shelter that the foundation supported, serving meals to homeless veterans. One of them, a man named Thomas, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, told me about how he had lost everything after being scammed by an investment advisor. He had trusted this advisor because the man had claimed to be a veteran himself and to understand the unique challenges vets faced. I gave him everything Thomas said, staring into his coffee. My disability payments, the small inheritance from my mom, money I had saved for years. He promised me safe, steady returns. Said he'd help me buy a house, set up my future. 6 months later, he disappeared with all of it. Did you report him? I asked gently. Yeah, but nothing happened. Guy had good lawyers, good connections. The system protected him, not me. Thomas looked at me then, and I saw the deep weariness in his eyes. You know what the worst part is? He's still out there, probably doing the same thing to other people. And guys like me, we just have to live with it. I made a mental note to have the foundation's legal team look into Thomas's case. Maybe it was too late to get his money back, but we could at least try. And maybe we could help make sure that advisor faced some consequences, even if they were just social and professional rather than legal. When I left the shelter that afternoon, I felt both fulfilled and hollow. Fulfilled because I knew the work we were doing mattered. Hollow because I was about to go have dinner with people who wouldn't understand or care about any of it. I went home and changed into a simple charcoal gray dress with a modest neckline and hem that fell just below my knees. I put on minimal makeup and small pearl earrings. I looked, as my mother would say, presentable but not remarkable, which was exactly how I always looked to them anyway. The drive to the Monarch Club was beautiful. Fresh snow had fallen that afternoon, coating everything in pristine white. Christmas lights twinkled from houses and businesses. Families walked together carrying presents and laughing. The world felt magical in that particular way it does on Christmas Eve, full of possibility and warmth. I pulled into the Monarch Club's circular driveway and immediately felt my stomach clench. The place looked even more beautiful than usual, decorated with thousands of white lights, elegant wreaths, and silver ribbons. Luxury cars lined the drive: Mercedes S-Class sedans, BMW 7 Series, Lexus LS models, Range Rovers, even a Bentley Flying Spur and a Rolls-Royce Ghost. And there was my Tesla Model 3, practical and efficient, and so obviously out of place among this parade of ostentatious wealth. But what made my stomach really drop was the sight of my entire family standing near the main entrance. Harold in a tuxedo, Patricia in a glittering silver gown, Nathan in a perfectly tailored suit, and Tiffany in a dress that probably cost more than some people's cars. They were standing there clearly waiting, and the expressions on their faces were not welcoming. I parked and took a deep breath. For just a moment, I considered simply driving away. But I had come this far. I got out of the car feeling the cold air hit my face, hearing the crunch of snow under my sensible heels. Tiffany spotted me first. I saw her nudge Nathan and whisper something that made him wince. Then they all turned to look at me, and I felt like a specimen under glass. I walked toward them, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Merry Christmas," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. My mother looked me up and down her perfectly made-up face, arranged in an expression of pity that cut deeper than any insult. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're still driving that electric thing. I thought you might have taken an Uber tonight. You look like a delivery driver, honey." The words hit me like a slap, but I kept my composure. "Hello, Mother. I thought we were having a family dinner." My father stepped forward then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was calculated. This was planned. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when making business decisions. "There's been a change of plans. Tonight's event is exclusively for Platinum members and above. You understand the club has very strict policies. We can't just bring in people who aren't members." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "But I thought you invited me to Christmas dinner with the family." "We did consider it," my mother said, examining her manicured nails. "But then we realized how uncomfortable you'd be. All of our friends are here tonight, Eleanor. Important people, business associates. We can't have you embarrassing us." The words hung in the cold air between us. "Can't have you embarrassing us." As if my mere presence was shameful. As if I was something to be hidden away rather than celebrated. Nathan looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but he said nothing. He never said anything. Tiffany, however, had plenty to say. "Don't make this difficult, Eleanor," she said, her voice sharp as ice. "You know exactly where you stand. This club isn't for people who do charity work and drive economy cars. It's for people who matter, people with real success and real connections. Maybe you should have thought about that before choosing to waste your life on computers and homeless people." Something inside me went very still. Waste my life. On computers and homeless people? These people, my family genuinely believed that my life's work was worthless because it didn't come with the kind of visible status symbols they valued. I see, I said quietly. So you invited me to dinner just to uninvite me in person. My father had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Eleanor, don't be dramatic. We're just being realistic about the situation. You're not a member here and the club has rules. Rules that conveniently changed tonight, I asked my voice, still calm, but with an edge now. Look, my mother said, digging through her Chanel purse. We're not trying to be cruel, sweetheart. We know you don't have a lot of money for fancy dinners. Here. She pulled out two $20 bills and a 10 and held them out to me. Why don't you go to Applebee's? Or maybe McDonald's? I hear they have a nice selection on their value menu. This should cover your meal and the drive home. She stood there, holding out that money, and the world seemed to crystallize around that moment. $50. My mother was giving me $50 like I was a child being sent away with allowance money. Like I was someone who needed her charity to afford a meal. I looked at that money, then at her face, then at each of their faces in turn. My father's stern disapproval, my mother's condescending pity, Nathan's guilty discomfort, Tiffany's undisguised contempt, and I really saw them for the first time in my life. Not as my family, not as the people whose love and approval I had spent 30 years chasing. I saw them as strangers who happened to share my DNA. Strangers who were small and petty and cruel. Strangers who measured worth in entirely meaningless ways and who could never see me for who I actually was. I didn't take the money. Instead, I looked my mother directly in the eyes and said very quietly, "Keep it. You might need it more than you think." Then I turned and began walking away. Each step felt lighter than the last. The snow crunched under my feet. Christmas carols drifted from inside the club, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years free. I had made it perhaps 10 feet when I heard a voice that made me stop. Miss Vance. Miss Vance. Where are you going? Your dinner reservation is waiting. I turned to see Richard Sterling practically running toward me from the club entrance. He looked genuinely distressed, his usually composed face showing confusion and concern. Behind him, I could see Sharon Mitchell, the assistant manager, also hurrying out. My family stood frozen clearly, not expecting this intervention. "I'm sorry, Richard," I said softly, using his first name deliberately. "There seems to be some confusion about my membership status and whether I'm welcome tonight." Richard's expression went from confused to thunderous in about 2 seconds. He turned to face my family, and his voice when he spoke was professionally polite but with an undercurrent of steel. "I'm sorry, is there a problem here?" My father drew himself up to his full height, puffing out his chest in that way he did when asserting dominance. "Young man, I don't know who you are, but this is a private family matter. We are platinum members of this club and we will not be questioned by staff." "I see," Richard said, his tone unchanged. "I'm Richard Sterling, general manager of the Monarch Club. And I'm afraid I need to clarify something important." "What could you possibly need to clarify?" Tiffany interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've already explained to Eleanor that this is a members-only event, and she's not welcome." Richard looked at Tiffany with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Mrs. Vance, the Monarch Club has no policy restricting Christmas Eve dinner to platinum members only. In fact, we welcome all members and their guests on this special evening. So that statement is factually incorrect." "That's not the point," my father blustered, his face starting to turn red. "The point is that Eleanor is not a member and we don't want her here. This is our family decision." "Mr. Vance," Richard said, and now his voice had gone very quiet in that way that makes people listen more carefully. "I think there's something you should know about Miss Eleanor Vance." My heart started pounding. This was it. The moment everything would change. I could stop him. I could shake my head, walk away, keep my secrets. But I didn't. I stood there in the falling snow and let it happen. What could she possibly have that we need to know about? Tiffany laughed, that sharp, cruel laugh I had heard so many times. Is she volunteering here now? Serving food to people who actually matter. Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. When he spoke, his words were clear and precise, carrying across the snowy space with perfect clarity. "Miss Eleanor Vance is not a volunteer. She is not a guest. She is the owner of the Monarch Club." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the snow falling. It was as if the entire world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. I watched their faces and saw the exact moment the words penetrated. My mother's mouth opened slightly, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly garish against her pale face. My father's red flush deepened to purple, then drained away to leave him gray and stunned. Nathan's eyes went wide, darting between me and Richard as if trying to find the punchline to a joke he didn't understand. And Tiffany, beautiful, cruel Tiffany, actually stumbled backward in her expensive heels, catching herself against Nathan's arm. "That's impossible," my father finally managed, his voice strangled. "The Monarch Club is owned by Vance Holdings. I know because I looked into investing." Vance Holdings, Richard confirmed, pulling out his phone and pulling up documents. "Which is a private holding company wholly owned by Eleanor Vance. She purchased the club 6 years ago for $18 million and has been operating it through professional management ever since." But my mother started, then stopped, unable to finish the thought. Sharon Mitchell stepped forward, then holding a tablet. "Would you like me to pull up the ownership documents, Mr. Sterling?" "I have them right here." "Please," Richard said. Sharon turned the tablet to face my family. I saw them staring at legal documents, at my name in black and white, at the incontrovertible proof that everything they thought they knew was wrong. "Your car," my mother whispered, still staring at the tablet. "Your clothes. You said you worked in tech support." I spoke for the first time since Richard's revelation, my voice steady and clear. "I said I worked in technology, Mother. I never said support. I founded a software company called Secure Vance Systems that revolutionized data security for financial institutions. I sold it when I was 26 years old for $60 million. I called to tell you about it, remember? You said it was a bad time because you were preparing for Nathan's engagement party." Nathan made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. "Ellie, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked," I said, looking at my brother. "None of you asked. You just assumed. You assumed I was struggling, that I was less than you, that I had failed to live up to the Vance name. You never considered that maybe I had exceeded it." A small crowd had gathered now. I saw other club members emerging from the warmth of the lobby, drawn by the commotion. I recognized several faces. Judge Charles Beaumont, the distinguished chairman of our board of trustees. Margaret and Robert Robertson, who served on the foundation board and were Heritage Club members. Thomas Warren, our head of security. Dr. Patricia Chen and her husband James, another Heritage Club family. Even young Sarah, one of our servers, stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. Judge Beaumont stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the lights, his face set in serious lines. "Richard, what's going on here?" Richard gestured toward my family with barely contained disgust. "Your Honor, the Vance family attempted to prevent Miss Vance from entering the club tonight. They told her she wasn't welcome and suggested she go to Applebee's or McDonald's instead." He paused, then added, "They also offered her $50 for the inconvenience." I saw several people in the crowd gasp. Margaret Robertson's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah, the young server, looked like she might cry. Judge Beaumont's expression went from serious to furious. "Harold, is this true?" My father tried to rally, tried to find that commanding presence he usually wore like armor. "Charles, this is a family matter. We were simply trying to spare Eleanor the embarrassment of attending an event where she wouldn't fit in." "The embarrassment," Judge Beaumont repeated slowly, "of attending her own club." "We didn't know," Nathan said desperately. "We had no idea she owned the place." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly, and the question hung in the air. "If I didn't own this club, if I was exactly the person you thought I was, would it have been acceptable to treat me that way? To dismiss me, to insult me, to hand me $50 and send me away on Christmas Eve?" No one answered because we all knew the truth. "Miss Vance," Judge Beaumont said, turning to me with genuine respect in his eyes. "On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I apologize for this treatment. This is not what the Monarch Club stands for." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "But it's not the club's fault. It's simply time for some truths to come to light." I turned to Richard. "I'd like to review the incident reports from the past 6 months involving the Vance family membership." Richard nodded and began scrolling through his phone. "Of course. We have documented 3 separate incidents of disrespectful behavior toward waitstaff. On September 3rd, Mrs. Patricia Vance berated a server named Maria for bringing water with ice when she had requested no ice. The language used was, according to the report, demeaning and unnecessarily harsh. I saw my mother's face flush. "That girl was incompetent. She's an honor student working her way through college," Richard said coldly. "And she followed the standard protocol when a preference isn't noted in advance." It continued. "On October 15th, Mr. Nathan Vance and Mrs. Tiffany Vance sent back a meal 3 times each time, with increasingly hostile comments about the chef's abilities. The chef, Antoine Moreau, is a James Beard Award nominee. The food was cold, Tiffany snapped. The temperature logs show it was served at the proper temperature each time, Richard countered. On November 2nd, Mr. Harold Vance berated a valet attendant named Marcus for taking too long to retrieve his vehicle. According to witnesses, he used profanity and made threatening comments about having the young man fired. "That boy was lazy," my father said. "That young man is a veteran who served 2 tours in Iraq and was retrieving a vehicle from the far lot during our busiest time of evening," Richard said, his voice hard. "And there's more. On October 28th, the Vance party damaged the 7th hole of our golf course by driving a cart through a restricted area. The damage cost $3,000 to repair, and it was never reported or paid for as required by club policy." "That was an accident," Nathan protested weakly. "An accident that you didn't report because you didn't want to be responsible for the cost," I said. "These aren't misunderstandings. This is a pattern of behavior. A pattern of treating people you consider beneath you as if they don't matter." "Doctor," Chen spoke up from the crowd. "I've seen it too. I've watched the Vance family snap at servers, dismiss staff, act as if simply being platinum members makes them royalty." Several other members murmured in agreement. My family looked around and saw that their reputation, carefully cultivated over years, was crumbling in real time. "There's one more matter to discuss," Richard said, and I heard the slight question in his voice. He was asking my permission. I nodded. "The Vance family submitted an application to the Heritage Club 6 months ago," Richard announced. "That application requires unanimous approval from the Board of Trustees and final approval from the club owner." I saw hope flare in my father's eyes. This was it. This was what he had been working toward for years. The ultimate status symbol. The proof that he had finally made it to the top. "The Board of Trustees met last week to discuss the application," Judge Beaumont said, stepping forward. The vote was 8-4 against approval, with several members citing concerns about character and treatment of staff. My father's face went white. "But we had nominations. We had recommendations." "You had recommendations from members who don't serve on the board and who don't see how you actually behave when you think no one important is watching," Judge Beaumont said. "The Heritage Club isn't just about wealth or connections, Harold. It's about character, integrity, and respect. Qualities you've repeatedly failed to demonstrate." However, Richard continued, even if the board had voted unanimously in favor, the application still required final approval from the owner. Every eye turned to me. My family looked at me with expressions ranging from desperate hope to dawning dread. I thought about Thomas at the shelter, about how he'd been scammed by someone who used connections and status to prey on vulnerable people. I thought about Maria the server, trying to work her way through college, being berated for a minor mistake. I thought about Marcus, a veteran who had served his country, being called lazy by a man who used his own veteran status as a prop. I thought about Sarah standing in that doorway watching this unfold, remembering every time Tiffany had snapped her fingers at her or my mother had complained about her service. I thought about 10-year-old me excited about a science fair project being dismissed because I wasn't Nathan. I thought about every accomplishment I had shared that was met with indifference. I thought about $50 being held out to me like I was a beggar. "The application," I said, "clearly is denied." My father made a sound like he'd been punched. My mother actually swayed on her feet. Tiffany's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," my father said, his voice rising. "I've worked for years for this. I've built relationships, made connections. You can't take this away from me because of some petty family squabble." "I'm not taking anything away from you, Father," I said calmly. "You were never entitled to it in the first place. The Heritage Club is for people who embody the values this club was founded on. Respect, integrity, community. You don't embody those values. Tonight proves that definitively." "This is revenge," Tiffany spat. "This is because you're jealous of us, of our success, of our lives." I looked at her, at this woman who had married my brother for his last name and his parents' connections, who measured her worth in designer labels and social invitations, and I felt nothing but pity. "I'm not jealous of you, Tiffany," I said quietly. "I pity you. You've built your entire identity on things that don't matter and don't last. And when those things crumble, you'll have nothing left because you never built anything real." I turned to Richard. "There's one more matter to address. The platinum membership discount." My father's face went from white to gray. He knew what was coming. The 25% discount offered to Platinum members is a benefit, not a right, I said. It's intended to reward members who contribute positively to the club community, who support our values, and who treat our staff with respect. The Vance family has failed on all counts. Effective immediately, Richard announced the Vance family's Platinum membership discount is revoked. All future charges will be billed at full price. Additionally, the $3,000 cost for the unreported golf course damage will be added to your next bill. I saw my father doing the math in his head, calculating how much this would actually cost them. The discount had been saving them thousands of dollars a year, money they apparently needed despite their displays of wealth. However, I continued, you're still welcome to maintain your basic membership if you choose. But let me be very clear. Any further incidents of disrespectful behavior towards staff will result in immediate suspension or termination of your membership. This club is a community, and every member of that community, from the owner to the newest busboy, deserves to be treated with dignity. Now I said I'd like to have my Christmas Eve dinner. Richard, I believe the Robertsons were kind enough to invite me to join their table. Margaret Robertson stepped forward immediately, her warm smile genuine and welcoming. We'd be absolutely delighted, Eleanor dear. We've been hoping you'd join us. As I started to walk toward the entrance with the Robertsons, my mother found her voice. Eleanor, wait. Please, can we talk about this? I stopped and turned back. About what, Mother? About how you tried to send me away with $50. About how you've spent 30 years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. About how you measure worth in all the wrong ways. We didn't know, she said, and there were actual tears in her eyes now. We didn't know about your company, your money, any of it. You didn't know because you never asked, I repeated. And even now I notice you're not apologizing for how you treated me. You're upset because you found out I have money and status after all. If I had been exactly who you thought I was, would you feel bad about what you did tonight? Would you think you owed me an apology? She didn't answer because we both knew the truth. Merry Christmas, Mother, I said softly. Enjoy your dinner. I walked into the Monarch Club with my head held high, surrounded by people who actually valued me. Behind me, my biological family stood in the cold, finally facing the consequences of their choices. The dinner that night was extraordinary. And not because of the food, though. The chef outdid himself with a 7-course Christmas feast. It was extraordinary because of the company, the conversation, the feeling of being genuinely welcomed and valued. The Robertsons' table included Judge Beaumont and his wife Helen Doctor, Chen and her husband James, and a young couple named David and Lisa Martinez, who had recently received a business development grant from the Vance Foundation. We talked about the foundation's upcoming projects, about the Martinez's plan to open a coding academy for underprivileged youth, about Judge Beaumont's grandchildren and their Christmas pageant. It was the kind of warm, genuine interaction I had always longed for from my own family but never received. Across the dining room, I could see the Vance family table. They sat in rigid silence, isolated in a room full of celebration. Other members who would normally stop to chat with the well-connected Vance family now walked past without acknowledgement. I saw several people actively turn away when my father tried to make eye contact. The social exile wasn't just beginning, it had already happened. Tiffany tried repeatedly to wave down acquaintances, women she had cultivated relationships with at charity, luncheons, and social events. But one by one, they pretended not to see her. Word had spread quickly through the club about what had happened outside. In elite social circles, there's nothing more damaging than being exposed as cruel to those you consider beneath you. I saw Nathan lean over and say something to Tiffany. She jerked away from him, her face twisted with anger. Even from across the room, I could see the cracks forming in their picture-perfect marriage. About halfway through the main course, Richard approached our table discreetly. Miss Vance, there's someone who would like to speak with you briefly if you have a moment. He says it's important. I excused myself and followed Richard to a small private meeting room off the main corridor. Inside was a man in his early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about substance than style. Miss Vance, thank you for seeing me, he said, extending his hand. My name is Mark Davies. I'm an investigative journalist with the Washington Chronicle. I felt a flutter of apprehension but shook his hand. How can I help you, Mr. Davies? Judge Beaumont appeared in the doorway. I asked Mark to come, Eleanor. I think you should hear what he has to say. Mark pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table. I've been investigating your father for the past 8 months, he said without preamble. Specifically, an investment fund he ran from 2017 to 2019 called the Vance Capital Growth Fund. Miss Domaksang. What about it? It was a fraud, Mark said bluntly. A sophisticated one, but a fraud nonetheless. Your father solicited investments from mostly middle-class and working-class individuals, many of them veterans promising conservative returns and low risk. He claimed the fund focused on stable blue-chip investments. He opened the folder and spread out documents. I saw account statements, bank records, email printouts. In reality, Mark continued he was using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors' classic Ponzi scheme structure. But he was also siphoning funds for personal use. Luxury purchases, maintaining his lifestyle, paying off debts from other failed ventures. I felt sick. How much? He took in about $12 million from 217 investors. When the fund collapsed in 2019, he claimed it was due to unexpected market volatility. He declared bankruptcy for the fund and walked away personally unscathed due to how he had structured the business entity. Most of the investors lost everything. Why didn't this come out at the time I asked, though? I thought I knew the answer. Good lawyers, strategic donations, and a lot of influential friends who helped bury it, Mark said. But I have new evidence. Former employees who kept copies of internal communications, bank records that show the personal transfers, testimony from investors who were told to keep quiet or face expensive litigation. He pulled out another set of documents. I also have evidence that your father has been trying to restart his scheme. He's been using his Monarch Club connections to recruit new potential investors, and he was planning to use Heritage Club membership as the ultimate credibility boost. I thought about Thomas at the shelter, about how he'd been scammed by someone who claimed to be a veteran and to understand veterans' needs. I thought about my father, who wore his veteran status like a costume, but had actually preyed on his fellow veterans for profit. Why are you telling me this? I asked. 2 reasons, Mark said. First, I wanted to make sure you weren't involved. My research showed you founded the Vance Foundation around the same time the fund collapsed, and a lot of its work focuses on helping victims of financial fraud. I needed to understand if that was conscience money or genuine altruism. And second, I need help. Your father is careful. He's covered his tracks well. But you own this club. You have access to membership records, reservation logs, financial transactions. If he's been conducting business here using club facilities for meetings with potential investors, there might be evidence in your records. I looked at Judge Beaumont. Is this legal? The club has every right to review its own records, the judge said carefully. If those records happen to show that a member was using club facilities for illegal activities, you have not just a right, but arguably a duty to report it. I thought about my father's application to the Heritage Club, about his desperate need for that status and those connections. I thought about how he had treated me earlier that evening, trying to send me away like I was an embarrassment. I thought about 217 people who had trusted him and lost everything. What do you need? I asked Mark. Over the next 2 hours, Richard, Mark, Judge Beaumont, and I combed through club records. We found reservation logs showing my father had hosted at least 15 private dinners in the club's small dining rooms over the past year, always with different guests, always billed as business meetings. We found emails he had sent through the club's business center. We found notes from the concierge about arranging meetings and calls. The picture that emerged was damning. My father had been using the Monarch Club as an office for his schemes, leveraging the prestige and exclusivity of the location to convince people he was legitimate and successful. There's one more thing, Mark said as we reviewed the final documents. I have a source who claims your father was planning to approach Heritage Club members specifically once he got in. These are some of the wealthiest, most well-connected families in the region. If he had gotten access to that network with his application approved, he didn't need to finish. The damage my father could have done with that kind of access was enormous. When we finally emerged from that back room, the dinner crowd had thinned. It was nearly 11 o'clock. The Vance family table was empty. They had apparently left hours ago. But many other guests remained lingering over coffee and dessert, enjoying the Christmas ambiance. I returned to the Robertsons' table, feeling emotionally exhausted but strangely energized. Margaret took one look at my face and reached out to squeeze my hand. Whatever you just dealt with, she said gently, I'm sure you handled it exactly right. Judge Beaumont joined us shortly after. Eleanor, I want you to know that the board fully supports whatever decisions you need to make regarding this situation. Thank you, I said. I'll need to think about next steps. Of course. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, what you did tonight, standing up to them, setting boundaries that took real courage. I've watched you for years, quietly doing good work, staying humble despite your success. You're exactly the kind of person this club should be proud to have as its owner. As midnight approached and Christmas Day officially arrived, I stood on the terrace overlooking the snow-covered grounds, a cup of hot chocolate warming my hands. The club was quieter now, just a few stragglers lingering in the lobby, soft Christmas music playing over the sound system. Richard joined me, 2 pieces of chocolate cake on a small tray. "Sharon insisted you needed cake," he said with a slight smile. "She said anyone who has the day you've had deserves chocolate." I laughed and accepted the plate. Sharon's a wise woman. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the winter landscape. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly. "I'm sorry that your own family treated you that way. I'm sorry you had to deal with that tonight of all nights." "Don't be," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Tonight was actually a gift. I finally stopped hoping they would change. I finally accepted that some relationships can't be fixed because the other people don't want to fix them. And I realized that the family I've built, the community I've created, matters more than blood ever could. For the record, Richard said, "You're one of the best owners I've ever worked for. The way you treat people, the values you uphold, the impact you make through the foundation, it all matters. It all makes a difference." "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot." He hesitated, then added, "What are you going to do about your father's schemes?" "I'm going to help Mark Davies finish his investigation," I said firmly. "I'm going to make sure those victims get whatever justice is possible, even if it's just the satisfaction of seeing him held accountable. And I'm going to make sure he never uses this club or any connection to me to hurt anyone else ever again." The membership terminated, effective immediately. "I'll have the legal papers drawn up tomorrow." Richard nodded approval. "Merry Christmas, Miss Vance." "Merry Christmas, Richard. And please, when we're alone, call me Eleanor." I drove home that night through silent, snowy streets, but I didn't feel alone. I felt liberated. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my family. I had set boundaries. I had stopped accepting their version of who I should be and embraced who I actually was. My phone buzzed with text messages as I drove. Nathan sending paragraph after paragraph of apologies and excuses. My mother alternating between pleading and anger. Tiffany surprisingly sending just 2 words, "You'll regret this." I deleted them all without responding. Mark Davies' article published on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas. The headline read, "Local businessman Harold Vance under federal investigation for investment fraud victims seek justice years after collapse of Vance Capital Growth Fund." The article was thorough, devastating, and completely factual. It detailed the mechanics of the fraud, the human cost to the victims, the ways my father had evaded accountability, and his recent attempts to restart his schemes using social connections from the Monarch Club. It also mentioned in carefully worded paragraphs how his own daughter, the owner of the Monarch Club and founder of the Vance Foundation, had cooperated with the investigation and had been working for years to help victims of financial fraud through her charitable work. The article made clear that I had no involvement in or knowledge of my father's crimes and had actually dedicated my career to helping people he had hurt. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced they were reopening the investigation into Vance Capital Growth Fund. Several victims filed a class action civil suit. The local bar association opened an ethics investigation into the lawyers who had helped bury the original scandal. My father was arrested on January 3rd. The charges included wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The U.S. attorney held a press conference where she called it a calculated scheme to defraud hardworking Americans, many of them veterans, out of their life savings. My mother, who claimed she had no idea about any of it, suddenly found herself named in several civil suits. Prosecutors argued that she had directly benefited from the stolen money and should be required to return those benefits. Her lifestyle of luxury shopping, spa days, and country club memberships was now being used as evidence against her. Nathan lost his job within a week. His employer, a financial services firm, couldn't afford to be associated with the Vance name given the scandal. Tiffany filed for divorce approximately 5 minutes after Nathan's termination became public. In the papers, she cited irreconcilable differences and misrepresentation of financial status. The social fallout was perhaps even more devastating for them than the legal troubles. The Vance family found themselves completely ostracized. Invitation dried up. Friends stopped returning calls. People who had cultivated their friendship for years now acted like they didn't exist. My mother showed up at my townhouse 3 weeks after the arrest. Security called to tell me she was at the gate, and I told them to let her in, curious despite myself. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unstyled. She wore designer clothes, but they hung on her like she'd lost weight. Most tellingly, her makeup was smudged, suggesting she'd been crying. "Eleanor," she said when I opened the door. "Just my name, nothing else." I didn't invite her in. We stood in the doorway, cold air rushing in, neither of us moving. "What do you want, Mother?" "I need your help," she said, and her voice cracked. "They're going to take everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry. They're saying I have to pay back money I didn't even know was stolen." "Did you ever wonder where it came from?" I asked quietly. "All that money for clothes and jewelry and club memberships. Did you ever ask Dad how he afforded it all?" She looked away. "I trusted him. I was his wife. I wasn't supposed to question him." "You weren't supposed to question him," I repeated slowly. "But you had no problem questioning me, did you? Questioning my choices, my career, my worth. You had no problem treating me like I was a disappointment, like I had failed somehow." "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," I corrected. "About me or about Dad. You only saw what you wanted to see. And now you want me to fix it for you. You're my daughter," she said, and now the tears were flowing freely. "Please. I have nowhere else to go." I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, but not quite indifference either. This woman had given birth to me, raised me, and spent 30 years making me feel like I wasn't enough. And now she stood before me, broken and desperate, asking for help. "I'm not going to bail you out," I said finally. "I'm not going to pay your legal fees or give you money or use my influence to make this go away." She made a sound of despair. But I continued, "I will do this. I'll make sure you have somewhere to live and enough money for basic necessities while the legal proceedings play out. A small apartment, not the mansion. A modest stipend, not unlimited funds. Enough to survive with dignity, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle you had." "Why?" she asked, searching my face. "After everything we did to you, why would you help at all?" "Because that's who I am," I said simply. "I help people, even people who've hurt me. But Mother, understand this. I'm not doing this because you're my family or because I owe you anything. I'm doing this because no one deserves to be homeless or destitute no matter what they've done. It's not about you. It's about the person I choose to be." "Can I?" She hesitated. "Can I see you? Can we try to rebuild something?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now I need distance. You hurt me deeply and consistently for my entire life. That doesn't just go away because you suddenly need me." She nodded, accepting this, and I saw something I'd never seen in my mother before: humility. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For all of it. For not seeing you, for not valuing you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough, Eleanor. More than enough. I was just too blind to see it. It was too little too late, but it was something." "Goodbye, Mother," I said gently and closed the door. Nathan tried to reconnect several times over the following months. He sent emails, left voicemails, even showed up at foundation events, hoping to catch me. I finally agreed to meet him for coffee in March, 3 months after that Christmas Eve. He looked different. Thinner, older, humbler. He was working as a junior financial analyst at a small firm, living in a studio apartment, driving a used Honda. "I left Tiffany," he said, though I already knew. Or she left me, really. The moment the money was gone, she was gone too. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was. "Don't be. You tried to show me who she was. I just didn't want to see it." He stirred his coffee absently. "I didn't want to see a lot of things." "Nathan, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I've been going to therapy. Real therapy, not just talking to a life coach or whatever. And I'm starting to understand how messed up our family was. How messed up I was." He looked up at me and his eyes were red. "I stood by while they treated you like garbage. While Tiffany mocked you. While Mom handed you $50 like you were a charity case. I stood there and said nothing because it was easier than standing up to them. Because I was weak and selfish and so desperate for their approval that I was willing to sacrifice you for it." "Yes," I said quietly. "You did all of that. I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't even know if I deserve the chance to try to make it right. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see who you are, what you've built, the difference you make in the world. And I'm so incredibly proud to be your brother, even though I've done nothing to earn that relationship." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or self-interest, but I saw only genuine remorse and a tentative hope. "I don't forgive you," I said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I appreciate you acknowledging it. I appreciate you finally seeing me. That's more than I deserve," he said. Probably I agreed, and he laughed, a sound without much humor but with real acceptance. "Can I?" He hesitated. Can I try to earn my way back? Not to your money or your connections. Just to your life as a brother who actually acts like one? I thought about it, really thought about it. Maybe I finally said, but Nathan, it's going to take time. Years, probably. And I'm not waiting around hoping you'll become someone different. If you change, great. If you don't, I'll be fine either way. Fair enough, he said. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I made a donation to the Vance Foundation. It's everything I could scrape together after legal fees and settling debts. It's not much. I opened the envelope and found a check for $5,000. For Nathan, in his current situation, it was probably a significant sacrifice. This will help a lot of people, I said. Thank you. It's the least I can do. He stood to leave, then paused. Merry Christmas, Ellie. Even though it's March. Merry Christmas, Nathan. My father went to trial in November. I didn't attend, but I read the coverage. The prosecution was thorough, presenting victim after victim who told stories of trust betrayed and lives destroyed. My father's lawyers tried to argue that the failures were due to market conditions, not fraud, but the evidence of personal transfers and falsified statements was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Given his age, it was likely a life sentence. The judge in her remarks called his crimes a betrayal of the worst kind, preying on the trust of hardworking Americans and veterans for personal gain. I felt no satisfaction in his conviction, but I felt peace. Justice had been served. As for me, life went on. The Vance Foundation continued to grow and thrive. We expanded our programs, opened 3 new veteran support centers, and launched a financial literacy program that had already helped thousands of people avoid predatory schemes. The Monarch Club flourished under my public ownership. Once word spread about how I had taken a stand against my own family's bad behavior, membership actually increased. People wanted to be part of a place that valued character over status, that treated everyone with dignity, that stood for something meaningful. 1 year after that fateful Christmas Eve, I hosted the club's annual holiday gala. The grand ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland, all silver and white and sparkling lights. I wore a simple but elegant navy dress, nothing too flashy, but I felt beautiful because I was happy. Judge Beaumont made a toast thanking me for my leadership and my commitment to making the Monarch Club a place of true community and excellence. Margaret and Robert Robertson presented me with an award from the Foundation's board, recognizing the impact we had made in the lives of thousands of people. People I respected, people I genuinely cared about, surrounded me with warmth and appreciation. This was my family now, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. No one here cared about my car or my clothes or whether I was living up to the Vance name. They cared about my character, my compassion, my integrity. About halfway through the evening, I saw him. Nathan standing near the entrance, looking thin and worn. He wasn't supposed to be there. The Vance family membership had been terminated months ago. But somehow he had gotten in. I excused myself and walked over to him. Security moved to intercept, but I waved them off. "Hello, Nathan," I said quietly. "Ellie," he said, and his voice cracked. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I wanted to give you this." He handed me a small wrapped box. I opened it carefully and found a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a compass. "So you always know which direction you're going," he said softly, "even when the people around you are lost." I felt unexpected, tears prick my eyes. "Thank you. I should go," he said. "But I wanted you to know I'm still working on being the brother you deserved. It's slow going, but I haven't given up." "Good," I said. "Don't." I watched him leave, and I felt that same strange mix of sadness and peace. Maybe one day we would rebuild some kind of relationship. Maybe we wouldn't. Either way, I would be okay. I returned to the ballroom, to the laughter and music and people who genuinely cared about me. Margaret grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor. Judge Beaumont's wife was teaching Richard how to properly waltz, and they were both laughing. The Martinezes were deep in conversation with a family who had just received a foundation scholarship. As midnight approached and Christmas Day officially arrived, I stood on the balcony, overlooking the snow-covered grounds, a glass of champagne in my hand. The lights of the club glowed warmly behind me, and the stars shone brilliantly overhead. A year ago, I had been handed $50 and told to go to McDonald's. I had been dismissed, belittled, and treated as less than human by people who were supposed to love me. Now I stood here as the owner of this beautiful place, the founder of a charitable organization, making real change in the world, and most importantly, as someone who had finally learned to value herself. I had lost a family in the process, but I had gained something far more precious, my self-respect and a chosen family who actually deserved me. Someone has to teach people that respect isn't negotiable, that your worth isn't determined by others' opinions, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. I wish I had learned that lesson years earlier, but I learned it when I needed to, and that's what matters. The road from being belittled and dismissed to standing in my power wasn't easy. There were nights I cried, days I doubted myself, moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But every single time I reminded myself of that Christmas Eve, of how small they had tried to make me feel, and I knew that going back to that version of my life was simply not an option. Your family, whether by blood or by choice, should lift you up, not tear you down. They should celebrate your successes, not diminish them. They should respect your worth, not demand you prove it over and over again. And if they can't do those things, then you have every right to walk away and build a life with people who will. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship to save yourself? How did you find the strength to do it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Your support helps me share these important stories, and I'd love to hear your own experiences. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are worth more than how others treat you.